Welcome everybody. I'd like to start off by making everyone aware that today's session is being recorded and all event recordings will be made available on the post-summit event webpage, which will be shared with all registered attendees once made live. Today's event will be available in both English and Spanish thanks to Cornell University's Translator Interpreter program. Our interpreter today is Andres Loret de Mola. To hear today's talk in Spanish, you can click the interpretation or language button in the control panel as depicted on this slide and select Spanish. I'll give folks a moment to do so now. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the last day of our 5th annual New York Seafood Summit and the first ever virtual summit. While we are disappointed that we did not get to, we are excited that we are able to expand our summit and enhance accessibility by offering them through this virtual platform. My name is Mike Saramella. I'm the Seafood Safety and Technology Specialist with New York Sea Grant, and I'll be your host for today's event. For those of you not familiar with New York Sea Grant, it is one of 34 university-based programs under NOAA's National Sea Grant College Program. New York Sea Grant is a cooperative program between NOAA, Cornell University, and the SUNY system. For nearly 50 years, New York Sea Grant has worked to support novel research of use to coastal communities and economies, and has provided technical support through multidisciplinary extension and education programming. You can check the chat box now for a link to New York Sea Grant's website to learn more about who we are and what we do. For those of you who are not familiar with the New York Seafood Summit, it was initiated in 2016 as a means of engaging and facilitating discussions among seafood stakeholders in New York. This includes those involved in the seafood production, processing, sales, preparation, and those simply interested in eating more New York seafood. While the summit traditionally has consisted of an in-person 2 to 3 hour session in Manhattan, this year's summit activities expanded throughout the week with 1 hour sessions Monday through Thursday and a 2 hour session today to wrap up the week. We're thankful for all of the engagement and participation throughout this week. This week's events would not be possible without the continued support of our Seafood Summit partners and planning team. I would like to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves and their organizations now. We'll start with Dr. Stephen Frattini of the Center for Aquatic Animal Research and Management, who worked with New York Sea Grant in 2016 to initiate the New York Seafood Summit and has been actively engaged in the planning and execution of the event ever since.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Frattini. I'm a veterinarian and the owner of the Center for Aquatic Animal Research and Management, which we lovingly know as Sea Farm. I'm really glad to have everybody here. I hope some of you were here during the rest of the week. And this is a new format, this week-long format. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm very proud of all the work everybody's put in. This has been really great. We're hoping that you stay excited and engaged throughout the day. We have some excellent panelists, and I think it's going to be a great end to our week. So Sea Farm takes a food systems approach to ensuring animal health and welfare, as well as viability and success of seafood businesses. And I want everyone to feel free to reach out if you want to discuss any topics from the fish to the dish. We really hope you enjoy your time today, and if you've been with us the week, we hope you enjoyed that, and we look forward to a bright and delicious future with all of you. So thanks again.
Thanks, Steve. I'll now pass the screen to Linda Laviolette with the Department of Agriculture and Markets, who has been an important member of the summit planning team since 2017 and crucial to its success in finding host partners.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Sea Grant, who have really organized most of this, and to our co-hosts. I'm a special assistant at the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. My job is to assist farmers and fishermen with economic development opportunities. I grew up on Long Island, spent a lot of time on the water when I was young. Historically, fish were plentiful and it was easy for fishermen to get their products to market. Today, fishermen are facing many hurdles. They've lost access to the market, and that's been bad for the economy, the shellfish seafood economy. Today, the Long Island seafood industry faces other challenges: poor water quality, harmful algae blooms, catch limits on traditional fishing stocks, and the loss of fish and shellfish processing. But there is hope. Scientists and fishermen are working together. We have a great new breed of fishermen who have reinvigorated the oyster industry and are on the way to bringing back scallops and clams. Seaweed culture is coming too. So I hope you enjoy today's summit. New York has the most sustainable seafood practices in the world. So please enjoy the summit and eat lots of local fish. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Next, I'll pass the screen to Claire Harton with Green Rabbits, who joined the planning team in 2017 and hosted our second seafood summit at the School of Visual Arts in New York City.
Hi, thank you, Michael. It's been an amazing week. I didn't expect this to go so well as an online platform since everyone's been using Zoom so much, but I really think there's been a lot of learning and people being able to be where they are and involved. So I think we'll probably continue with some online, I'm imagining, in the future too. My background as a food systems planner involved with interdisciplinary research and design and around food and looking towards the future and communities for New York State brought me to this project through Linda LaViolette and Michael Chiarmella. Anyway, I'm just delighted that you're all here. I'm delighted that we have a platform to look at that dialogue, especially today on the last day when we have the panel. So thanks for all the hard work, Michael. Well done.
Thanks, Claire. The next member of the planning team, Liz Carollo with Grow NYC, joined the summit team in 2018 and has been hosting the summit at Project Farmhouse and assisting with the planning ever since.
Thanks so much, Mike. I'm Liz Carollo, as Mike said, with Grow NYC. We're a 50-year-old nonprofit that provides essential programs and services throughout the 5 boroughs and makes it easy for all New York City residents to contribute to a vibrant, livable New York City. Like I've said all week, we're thrilled to be part of the annual Seafood Summit because Grow NYC green markets are one of the few places in the city where New Yorkers can reliably purchase fresh seafood and shellfish direct from the people who caught it. I just want to say cheers to another successful seafood summit and to all of us working together to support viable fisheries for years to come. Really proud to be part of this group and this week, and excited to see where the conversation takes us.
Thanks, Liz. Lastly, I'd like to pass the screen to Emma Forbes. Emma is the newest member of the planning team and the new aquaculture specialist for New York Sea Grant.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. As Mike said, I'm New York Sea Grant's new aquaculture specialist. I joined the Sea Grant team in September of 2020. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. I was away for about 8 years, but I am so excited to be back in my home state working with all of you. My role with the New York Sea Grant is to support the development of sustainable aquaculture throughout the state. I'll be working with existing and emerging aquaculture ventures from the Great Lakes region down to Eastern Long Island. Since I'm new to the position, I've been spending the last few months acquainting myself with the industry and the ins and outs of what is going on with aquaculture here. And I'm just beginning to develop my extension programming. And I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. And thank you.
Thanks again, Steve, Claire, Liz, Linda, and Emma for all of your support and the time you've dedicated to planning this year's New York Seafood Summit. Before we get started, I'd like to review some ground rules for today's event. We have set this event up as a meeting, which allows participants to share video and audio so we can hopefully facilitate more engaging and interactive question and answer sessions. However, we do ask that you keep yourself muted when not speaking. If you have questions, please feel free to share them in the chat box at any time. The chat box can be found in the Zoom control panel as depicted on this slide, or you can raise your hand using the reactions button shown here. During the question and answer session, we will ask those who raise their hands to unmute and share their questions as we see them raised. Finally, we ask that all participants and presenters show respect to one another as we engage and learn today. Now, I'd like to take some time to introduce a special guest joining us to make some opening remarks. On behalf of the Summit Planning Team, I'd like to thank Becky Shuford, the Director of New York Sea Grant, for her support and for joining us to kick off the last event of our 2021 Seafood Summit. Thank you, Becky. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Mike. And welcome everyone to final day of the 5th annual New York Seafood Summit. I'm really thrilled to be able to be here with you all today and open today's session. And to start, I'd really like to thank all that made this week such an incredible success, and it really has been. The organizers and the partners, of course, the presenters, certainly And of course, all of you, the participants that are here, wouldn't do this without you. So thank you very much to everyone. I think it goes without saying that this has clearly been a year like no other. And as our colleagues have shared over the course of the week, it has imparted considerable challenge to the seafood industry. But we've also heard that it's inspired a lot of ingenuity and opportunity. And that's been really great to hear. Today, you're going to hear some updates about seafood regulations from our colleagues at the National Sea Grant Law Center, as well as from National Sea Grant Office at NOAA on efforts at the federal level. And that'll be in the context of change and transition that this year has brought. And hopefully it's information that will help to understand what this means for you all, help you become aware of some of the resources that are available to support New York's really incredible seafood industry. And of course, you've heard this mentioned already. This will be followed by a really fantastic panel from industry, agency, and organizational partners. And they're going to discuss challenges of the 2020 pandemic, but importantly, resilience to crisis. I did want to point out, in case you weren't aware, and even if you were, I'm going to remind you, one of New York Sea Grant's 4 priority focus areas is sustainable fisheries, aquaculture, and seafood businesses. And I will point out the other 3 focus areas that we have also have activities and efforts that also support the seafood industry in New York. And I did also want to point out, in addition to being a native New Yorker myself, my professional background actually began as a fisheries biologist. I was fortunate enough to be able to study yellowfin tuna for quite a number of years, and I had a very distinct privilege to learn from and work closely with a lot of fishermen on the East Coast, and that was really formative for me. And so I think you could say that the seafood industry is in my DNA. So it's really great to be here with you all today. I'd also like to share that whether in times of crisis or just in general, New York Sea Grant really is committed to partnership with and support to the New York seafood industry. And that's through our research, our education, and our extension programming. Again, this clearly has been a pretty disruptive year. We are here to work together with you to help find solutions. I did see, I think right at the beginning when I joined in, that Mike had a screen up that was showing a number of regulatory guides or manuals. So one activity I just wanted to highlight that might be of interest, and Mike, I'm not sure if you said anything about it, but we did Mike really established a seafood direct marketing task force this year. And that was in direct response to challenges brought on by the pandemic. And through that, there have been a series of marketing resources that have been developed to help industry navigate the regulatory frameworks and really to be able to try and adapt to changing economic and market demands, such as like what you all have faced this year. Finally, it's events like this summit that help facilitate the critical communication and collaboration, and really important to help us build the relationships across partners and facilitate exchange of knowledge and information. And that is, I think, as you all well know, essential to the success of the industry in any time. New York Sea Grant really does rely on your engagement. It's critical. We rely on your insights, and that's to ensure that our programming is and remains relevant, applicable, and effective, and also to best identify what you need most from us. So I'm just going to make one more closing remark, and I'm going to ask that you please continue to engage with us and partner with us. And to that end, I hope you'll participate in next year's 6th Annual Seafood Summit. So thank you, Mike, and thanks to everybody, and I'm looking forward to today.
Great. Thank you, Becky. Great. Next, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Showalter-Otts, who is the director of the National Sea Grant Law Center, who will provide us with an overview and a brief update on seafood-related regulations that may be of interest to many of you. Thanks for joining us today, Stephanie. The screen is yours.
Hi, thanks everyone. Thanks for the invitation. So the National Sea Grant Law Center is one of the 34 Sea Grant programs that Michael mentioned, but we're unique in the network in that we are established to provide non-advocacy legal research, education, and outreach to the Sea Grant network. So we get lots of questions about commercial fisheries and aquaculture, and so we've been doing a lot of research on that. I'm joined here today by Catherine Janesy, A, who's one of our senior staff attorneys, and Olivia Dean, our new Ocean and Coastal Law Fellow. And if it's okay, Mike, we were gonna tag team a bit to kind of get through it. So Michael gave us a list of things that people were interested in. It was quite a lot. So I don't know how much we're going to get through in 15 minutes, but Olivia is going to start by talking about the Magnuson-Stevens Act and some executive orders.
Hi, thank you. So to start with the Magnuson-Stevens Act, this act, as you might know, has not been reauthorized in a number of years, so I don't have any new substantive changes to cover. But I would like to note that there has been a bill introduced to update and reauthorize this act. This bill was introduced in December 2020, and it's still in the discussion stage. So there is room for a lot of changes to happen, and it'll probably be quite some time until we see this move out of this stage and through the House and through the Senate. So some of the goals of the bill are to strengthen the use of science and transparency, and move towards ensuring that fisheries can adapt to climate change. Moving on to executive orders, since President Biden has been elected, he has kind of taken a flurry of actions, and there are kind of too many to really go into detail during this time. But I do want to touch on 4 of these executive orders that have the potential to affect fishermen or affect fisheries management. So the first is President Biden issued a revocation of certain executive orders concerning federal regulation. So this ordered a halt and review of several executive orders issued by former President Trump. And it mainly targeted executive orders relating to reducing regulatory costs or efficiency in review. The second order I want to talk about is titled Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad. And there are a number of aspects to this executive order. One is that it directs the Secretary of Commerce to solicit input from fishermen and other stakeholders on how to make fisheries more resilient to climate change. So this could include changes to management or monitoring techniques or just general improvements in science. This order also sets a goal of preserving 30% of waters by 2031. And it also notes that coastal communities have a central role to play in addressing climate change. The third executive order I wanted to talk about is called Protecting Public Health and the Environment. And this order probably affects fishermen less than the climate change order, but it does set a number of environmental review directives. So one thing it does is it directs the review of boundaries and policies for monuments. One of them is the Northeast Canyons Marine Monument off the coast of Cape Cod. So at least in the courts, this has created a little bit of uncertainty around the status of the monument and what sort of fishing is allowed. But as of this time, there have not been any changes to the border of the monument. Finally, I just wanted to touch on President Biden's executive order for promoting COVID-19 safety in travel. And this order directs the Coast Guard to take action to require masks in compliance with CDC guidelines on public maritime vessels. So those are the main updates on executive orders. I'll pass it along to my colleague, Kathy, to talk about some more updates.
Yes, so hi, everyone. I just wanted to give everyone just a few updates on CARES Act and other support that's available right now for fishermen. So the Paycheck Protection Program was reauthorized and passed COVID legislation. And so the deadline for that program is currently open till March 31st. So all through March, that program, if you're not familiar with, allows kind of loans that can be forgivable for businesses if they use them for certain business expenses. And what's of note is starting this Wednesday for the next 14 days, the program is only open to businesses that have less than 20 employees. So it's really focusing on small businesses to be able to get in there and get these loans from the government. Another change President Biden just did to the program was change the calculation for sole proprietors, independent contractors for the amount of money that they can get under the program. So right now, if you're a smaller seafood business, it's definitely the time, if you've not applied for a PPP loan, to kind of get into the system. And I can drop a link for the SBA page in there to kind of help show where you could find a lender and those types of things. And again, the overall deadline for that program is March 31st. Under the CARES Act, they also provided money for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And those loans, that program is open through the end of the year, so December 31st. And they aren't forgivable, so they would have to be paid back. And the interest rates on those are 3.75% for small businesses. So again, that's another loan that's available for any business that's struggling. And that can be used for a wider range of business expenses than that PPP loan could be used for. And then quickly, we just wanted to provide an update on the nationwide permits that were issued by the Trump administration right before they went out of office. So they modified and issued 12 different nationwide permits, and 3 of those are related to mariculture. So they updated the nationwide permit 48 for shellfish mariculture, and then issued 2 new permits. So nationwide permit 55 is for seaweed, and nationwide permit 56 is for finfish aquaculture. And so for that seaweed and the finfish aquaculture one are pretty similar. They're both saying they're only authorizing installing structures in the waters. They both are allowing for multi-trophic operations, so you could combine them with shellfish operations. And specifically, the seaweed one is only authorizing the structures, nothing else under the permit. But like most things that were issued at the end of the Trump administration, we're not really clear now, starting with the change of administration, how that permit is going to go into effect. And if the Army Corps will adopt it on a nationwide scale, it could be that each region of the Army Corps of Engineers decides to not adopt these new permits or impose new conditions. So we're really up in the air on those permits, but they were issued. They're not scheduled to go into effect till March 15th. So we're still kind of in a holding pattern to see where we're going to go from there. And with that, I'll pass it on to Stephanie.
Great, thanks. So just a couple other things we were going to touch on. One related to aquaculture. There's often a discussion about organic certification for aquaculture. There are several groups urging President Biden to ensure that aquaculture operations remain eligible for USDA organic certification. But there's always kind of questions circulating. The USDA has not kind of moved forward with their organic certification that has kind of been in the works for a while. It's just on their list. With respect to seaweed, there is a mechanism for organic certification if seaweed is being used as an additive, but it's not clear how that guidance applies when seaweed isn't an additive, like if you're selling it for food, and there's some confusion about that. There have been numerous requests to USDA to clarify some of the organic provisions with respect to aquaculture, but no guidance has been issued to date. So another area that we continue to be in a holding pattern for. Another thing that you may have heard about with respect to offshore aquaculture are aquaculture opportunity areas. So President Trump issued an executive order about promoting American seafood competitiveness. As part of that, encouraged NOAA to go through a process to identify aquaculture opportunity areas. The agency has picked 2 so far, one in the Gulf of Mexico, one in Southern California, where they're focusing right now. But we've heard that they are continuing to move through the process and maybe selecting the next 2 or announcing the next 2 in the coming months. All this would do is to try to streamline kind of the focus or attention on where the agency thinks offshore aquaculture would be the best fit. Several environmental groups have issued letters to President Biden urging him to replace that executive order with one that focuses more on wild-caught fisheries as opposed to aquaculture. So that tension there between aquaculture and wild-caught fisheries, that executive order is not currently on any of the list of President Biden to review. It has not been revoked. So far, it doesn't seem to be getting as much attention as some of the other executive orders. But NOAA has stated that even if that executive order is revoked, the agency believes it has the authority to continue doing those activities related to the opportunity areas and other things that were mentioned in that executive order. And then finally, we were asked a little bit about some insurance questions. So here at the National Sea Grant Law Center, we're all environmental attorneys. We focus more on the natural resource side of things. So we're not, experts in maritime insurance, but there was one question related to the Jones Act. So the Jones Act is a federal statute that allows injured crew members of a vessel to recover certain damages if they get sick or if they are injured. And it's under very kind of arcane rules of admiralty law. Basically, you have to be a Jones Act seaman, which means that you are an individual engaged or employed in any capacity on board a vessel. So generally, fishermen, fish processors who are working on vessels are considered Jones Act seamen. But there is some question about whether aquaculture workers fall within the Jones Act, and it can be very farm dependent. It depends on, are your aquaculture workers working on boats at the farm, or is it in shallow enough water that they're walking, right? Those type of things. So there was a question related to insurance coverage. So there are insurance companies that offer Jones Act coverage, policy coverage. For instance, if you have workers that you might have to pay Jones Act type claims, you can get insurance for that. If you were seeking Jones Act insurance and were denied, it could be because your workers are not falling within the scope of the Jones Act and would be entitled to state workers' compensation. And so that would be the insurance coverage you would need, right, for state workman's comp instead of the Jones Act. So that's a very fact-specific and nuanced area of law, but there is ongoing kind of confusion that needs to be worked out legally with respect to the different classes of workers with respect to aquaculture under that area. And then finally, another insurance category that's talked a lot is crop insurance for aquaculture. There are some aquaculture operations that can get crop insurance. Clams, for instance, in Florida, and I think Massachusetts can qualify for crop insurance, but it's and oyster insurance in Louisiana. But some of these have started as pilots, and they're not like fully implemented throughout the United States. There are a number of discussions happening to try to get crop insurance more readily available for aquaculture operations. This is a priority of the East Coast Shellfish Growers Association. Florida recently had a meeting with the USDA. Some of these resources are available online. We'd be happy to share it, after the call. But that is our rapid fire update, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie, Olivia, and Kathy. Before we open it up for questions, I'd like to introduce Chuck Wyrick. Chuck is the aquaculture manager for the National Sea Grant Program, and he's going to be sharing some insights into current federal efforts and operations related to seafood. Thanks for joining us today, Chuck. The screen is yours.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Mike. I appreciate it. Let me share my screen here, and we'll get started. Let's see here. Okay. Sorry about the last few days. I don't know what's up with that, but again, glad to be here today while this is loading up. Can you guys see anything or?
Yeah, check. We still see it's just not presentation mode yet.
Oh man.
Yeah, check. We still.
Yeah, can you see now? Okay, I'm changing everything here. So, okay. Are we good to go?
Good.
You can see it. Okay. All right. Again, thanks for the invite, Mike and everyone with New York Sea Grant. So we're asked today, myself and my co-presenters here, our co-workers. I'm one of the aquaculture managers at the National Sea Grant Office based in Silver Spring, Maryland. Mark Rath is also on the call. He's my counterpart. We share the portfolio basically for the national office. We're both aquaculture managers, but we're also charged with helping the fishing industry as well. So that's part of our portfolio. It's not in our title, but it's part of our portfolio. And our boss is Deputy Director Cola Garber, who serves as the aquaculture lead. So basically what I was asked to present today was just an overview of NOAA funding opportunities by line office. Also want to discuss some NOAA intra-agency efforts and collaborations with respect to aquaculture and fisheries, the seafood resources. And finally, just briefly discuss some NOAA inter-agency efforts and collaborations that we have. So the funding opportunities that NOAA has, they're divided by line offices. So I'm going to discuss four separate line offices or four separate categories here. First, Sea Grant, then National Marine Fisheries Service or NOAA Fisheries, National Ocean Service, and finally the NOAA SBIR program. So to get into a Sea Grant, I wasn't sure if most folks were familiar with Sea Grant. The overall program is, as Mike had mentioned and Stephanie as well, there's 34 Sea Grant programs located in coastal states, territories, also the Great Lakes region. And so there's been a lot of investments in Sea Grant that Sea Grant's has made over the years. So over 50 years, Sea Grant's invested in sustainable marine and Great Lakes fisheries and aquaculture to help out coastal communities maintain a supply of seafood. So the funding mechanisms we have at Sea Grant, and there's a link that's shared there. It's shared on the final slide as well to our funding opportunities. So for aquaculture and fisheries, we have several means here. The national strategic initiatives, I'll talk a little bit more about those. Those are focused on aquaculture. We also have a Sea Grant program omnibus competitions. Those for all of the programs, and it's a cooperative program in between Sea Grant and the universities where the programs are housed. I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. Then we also have fellowships and special projects, and then finally other or miscellaneous opportunities focused on fisheries and aquaculture. So just to give you an idea of some of the NSIs, again, these are aquaculture. Back in 2019, these projects have been funded. There were 3 separate competitions. One was exploring new aquaculture opportunities. One was social and behavioral economic research needs, and finally advanced aquaculture collaborative programs. So these projects are up and running to showcase the hubs. These advanced aquaculture collaborative programs, we refer to them as hubs. So there's 11 of these that have been funded. New York Sea Grant's part of one. That's the East Coast Hard Clam Selective Breeding Program. So they're scattered throughout all of the programs of Sea Grant. And so there's a lot of different topics here, but it's all about advancing aquaculture. There's a lot of workforce development and marketing associated with these activities as well. So a good distribution there to help out aquaculture development in the U.S. So our NSI from this past year was focused on addressing economic and market needs of the U.S. aquaculture industry. So these projects were just released back in December. There were 12 projects funded for a total of 4.7 million. The cap that we're working with was 5 million there. So they're regionally distributed, different topics associated with economics and marketing. If you want some more information, there is a link here to view the selected projects. And so as far as NSIs going forward, we're gathering information through our aquaculture liaison, LaDon Swan. We've got needs assessment surveys that are out, both internal to the Sea Grant Network and another one external to industry stakeholders to help tailor our funding needs for NSIs and other opportunities going down the road. So we're hoping to build on that over the course of the next several years. So moving on to omnibus competitions, again, 34 programs. There's 4 focus areas in Sea Grant: healthy coastal ecosystems, resilient communities, economies, environmental literacy and workforce development, and finally, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. So these are state administered competitions. And so routinely there's a number of fisheries and aquaculture projects that are selected through these competitions. Some programs also have mini grant competitions, and these can be directed for folks, for university folks, for agency folks to also work with the industry, and they can also be industry led as well, but they have to have a research component to them. So moving on to fellowships and special projects, most folks are familiar with the long-standing Canals Marine Policy Fellowship Program, and those fellowships can be involved in fisheries and aquaculture related work. We also have out right now a competition. It's a special portal project. It's only open to Sea Grant programs, but it's addressing COVID-19 impacts to seafood resources. That's due in early April. There's another one that's coming out, or it was released yesterday, due late April. It's a Sea Grant Food from the Sea Careers Program. It's a scoping exercise basically directed at regional projects looking at needs to address future funding opportunities through the Young Fishermen's Development Act, and also to help us plan for aquaculture needs as well. We do have another project portal open to Sea Grant. Sea Grant programs are looking for a National Aquaculture Extension Coordinator between Sea Grant and NCOS with their spatial planning activities, as Stephanie mentioned, and I'll talk about it here a little bit more shortly. There's the aquaculture opportunity areas. The NCOS folks have been working heavily with coastal planning issues. They've developed a lot of tools, but they don't have an extension arm. And so this is one means where we can hopefully help involve Sea Grant to get the word out to industry stakeholders, and then get that information from the stakeholders back up to NCOS to allow refinement of tools. And then finally, there's another opportunity due late April, Sea Grant Northeast Fishing Communities and Offshore Wind Extension Support. I mention this because it's open to Northeastern states, including New York. So more information on that can be found on our website. So other opportunities, we have initiated omnibus aquaculture supplemental funding. As mentioned before, we have these omnibus competitions. As part of that, if programs qualify, depending on the percentage of aquaculture related projects submitted to their omnibus, they can receive aquaculture supplemental funding up to a certain percentage for more projects directed at aquaculture. We also released last year the COVID-19 rapid response funding. There was a number of projects that are ongoing right now that also included fisheries related projects. And so a lot of these were restoration of shellfish, getting money into the hands of growers to build both primarily oyster but also there's some clam activity as well. I will put a link in the chat for a story map and a news story that illustrates the restoration aspect of this. A number of projects were involved with direct marketing as well. There's was the Greater Amberjack Regional Funding Opportunity that was recent. Also, there's an ongoing, letters of intent are already past due, but coming up at a due date, I believe March 16th is a program we have a funding opportunity with ocean acidification program addressing multiple stressors of shellfish aquaculture through research and industry partnerships. Then we have the American Lobster Research Program, which is due late or mid to late April for 2021. And again, there's a link for our funding opportunities for Sea Grant. Moving along to NOAA Fisheries, folks are probably familiar with the Saltonstall Kennedy Grant Program. They administer this. It's an annual competition focused on seafood communities to resolve their issues. Both fisheries and aquaculture are eligible here, as well as a bycatch reduction engineering program. Also, there's regional marine fishery commission competitions for the commissions of the Atlantic, Gulf, and Pacific, looking at pilot aquaculture projects. They're open right now as an aquaculture literacy mini grant program that's jointly administered. That's due early April. We have the Atlantic, the Atlantic Salmon Habitat Program that's also due in April, as well as a NOAA Chesapeake Bay Fisheries Research Program opportunity. And so again, please see the links for more information on these opportunities. The National Ocean Service, there's several opportunities here, both through NCOS and ORR, which is the Office of Response and Restoration. The two NCOS programs deal with harmful algal blooms, and then the ORR program deals with marine debris. So those are competitions available as well. And then the NOAA SBIR program, this is administered through the Technology Partnerships Office. And so it provides small businesses the platform or the opportunity to develop products, innovative products with excellent commercial potential. There's 3 phases involved here. Phase 1 allows for up to, I believe, $120,000 for 6 months projects to test the product. And phase 2 is commercialization. That's up to $400,000. Those are 2-year projects. And then phase 3 is unfunded, but that's full commercialization of the product. And so the current cycle is phase 1 solicitation and includes blue economy subtopic as a subtopic, and that includes fisheries and aquaculture. So finally, moving on here to interagency efforts and collaborations. There's a lot of things to talk about here. I'll just briefly mention some of the primary topics here. So again, we have the Sea Grant Extension Networks, and folks in New York are probably familiar with this, but we like to refer to it as boots on the ground. We have a great network where we're currently compiling a more definitive look at this, but right now we believe we have about 45 to 50 FTE equivalents for aquaculture and about 50 to 60 for fisheries across the nation. We tie these folks in with folks from NOAA Fisheries, as well as the Sea Grant Law Center participates in these regional network calls where we exchange information over 4 regions across the U.S. We also have regular line office communications. Again, I mentioned LaDon Swan, our Sea Grant Aquaculture Liaison. Again, I mentioned earlier the coordinator position between Sea Grant and NCOS and the joint OAP Sea Grant grant competition. As Stephanie mentioned, we are working as far as planning and coordination with other line offices regarding these aquaculture opportunity areas. And Sea Grant was also involved with coordination and implementation of the CARES Act funding. So as far as interagency efforts and collaborations, NOAA routinely collaborates with a number of agencies, including the logos listed here, from BOEM, Army Corps, EPA, FDA, DOE, Office of Science and Technology Policy, and also USDA, both NIFA and Agriculture Research Service. And so some examples here for efforts, ongoing efforts here. We're currently developing what we're calling the Aquaculture Info Exchange. And this will be an online community based on distributed teams. And it'll involve both members from the public and private sector with interest in aquaculture and related topics. We're going to pair up, NOAA's pairing up with USDA on this. And so I think this will be a great tool for both agencies and for stakeholders primarily. We're regularly meeting with USDA. We have high-level coordination with them regarding funding opportunities so we can avoid duplication and better target stakeholder needs. As part of this, we're working towards better coordination between the traditional land grant cooperative extension and also Sea Grant extension. And we also routinely assist USDA regarding stakeholder engagement. For example, they reached out to us to connect commercial fishermen for the seafood trade relief program. And so we had several regional webinars on that to tie those folks in with USDA Farm Services Agency offices so they could apply for those funds. And that's about it. I think I'm about out of time, and I think we do have the next segment for some questions. But thank you again for the invite, and here's some other links. I should point out too that we do have a seafood information and resources page on our site, and that's got a lot of information there as well for not just aquaculture but fisheries as well. And our emails are listed there. If you want to follow up, please email myself, Mark, or Cola. And thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. So we'll now open up for some questions from participants. Remember, you can either enter your questions into the chat box or raise your hand using the reactions button and unmute once your name is called. Are there any questions for Stephanie, Kathy, Olivia, or Chuck? Let's see. So you guys can enter them in the chat box or feel free to raise your hand. We'll give folks a minute to type those out. I'm not seeing any come in, so I guess you guys answered all the questions today. You've got it. All right, one last.
Mike, Sam has his hand raised.
Whoop. All right, Sam.
So sorry about that. That was a miss. Appreciate the session.
Whoop. Here we go. We've got a question. What is the number of the new bill in the House? Does anyone from the Law Center know that?
Is that for the Magnuson-Stevens?
Carrie, can you elaborate?
Yes, that's the Magnuson-Stevens.
Okay, yeah, Olivia can double check that and we'll get it in the chat.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Emma, do you see any hands raised? I don't see any.
Nope, I think we're good.
Good. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stephanie, Kathy, and Olivia. Thank you, Chuck, for joining today and sharing. We'll get moving on to our next session. If you guys do come up with questions, you can always reach out to me. I can reach out to our Law Center or our national office, or you have some of their contact information. You can reach directly to them with any additional questions. So next, we'll move into our final session for today and focus on the impacts of the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic on the seafood industry. This panel was created to highlight the challenges of the 2020 pandemic, how it affected different sectors of the seafood industry, and how those individuals and/or businesses did or could adapt to be more resilient in the future. Steve will step in to moderate this panel for us. Over to you, Steve.
Hey, all right. Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for the sessions that we just had. I'm going to introduce the four panelists in no other order than just how they appear on my outline in front of me. First, we have Carrie Heffernan, chef at Grand Banks. We have Peter Stein, the founder of Pico Oysters. We have David Lepkofker, the chief inspector with Ag and Markets. And we also have Paul Pachter, the CEO of Long Island Cares. And we're going to give them all a chance, about 5 minutes or so, to introduce themselves and what they're up to in the seafood space. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start with Chef Carrie Heffernan.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. And this has been really, really helpful so far as a preview to what we're talking about. I don't want to bore you all with my bio and highlights of having had the chance to grow up on the water. I've been able to be fortunate enough to work at a lot of great restaurants in New York City. I was the opening chef at 11 Madison Park. We developed a number of great things there. Some of you might have heard of the Shake Shack. I developed that burger. I wish I could do the same thing for clams in New York and come up with a clam burger that would equal that in popularity, but that's another topic. And when I was working at 11 Madison Park with Danny Meyer, we really sort of got focused on the idea of sustainability in seafood. So that's become something of a passion and a vocation of mine. I've had the opportunity to work with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, Seafood Watch in, creating awareness there. I work with some other NGOs to sort of get some pictures of on the policy side to sort of understand where things are headed there and how people in my space can sort of positively impact that. I guess that the biggest thing is that as chefs, we are considered knowledgeable leaders, and we are people who the public at large tends to sort of trust in our judgment. And I'd like to say that every restaurant you went into, that people were really doing the right thing in terms of using the fish that was making the greatest possible impact and taking the least from the ocean, but also on working with locally sustainably sourced fish and shellfish in the Northeast. We have 4 restaurants. One is called Grand Banks. It's a 140-foot, 80-year-old former cod fishing vessel that has been converted into an oyster bar and seafood in New York City, in Tribeca. We have a similar vessel called Pilot in Brooklyn. And then a restaurant in Governor's Island, which we sort of are next door neighbors with the Billion Oyster Project, with whom we've done a great deal of work, and has been, it's very interesting to see what they're doing to sort of obviously repopulate New York Harbor, et cetera. Many of you are probably familiar with their work. But we would even go so far as to hang cages off of each of those vessels and see how well the oysters are growing, just to get an idea of at least what's potential in terms of repopulation of some shellfish, et cetera. On the sort of future of sustainability and seafood, I'm hoping that this movement towards kelp can be a very productive one and gets pushed through. I think it's New York Senator Kaminsky's desk at the moment, but those of you probably involved in this could tell us more about that. But I'm very excited to see what I can do on the culinary side to make these things not only palatable, but really enjoyable. I'd like to see where people are sort of sourcing these things out and trying them and incorporating them into their sort of routine of trying different species of fish and shellfish and marine aquaculture that they haven't really tried before. I guess we have a little video that Michael can sort of show that might show my love of the oceans and a quick picture of Grand Banks.
Oh man, this is cool. All right, I see some busts over there.
Yep.
I'm gonna say there's life here.
All right, fire when ready. They're albies, they're albies. False albacore. Oh, nice.
What do you want, quick retrieve?
Yeah. You're gonna hook one here. Come on, eat it. Eat it, he's on. Nice. Attaboy.
Okay, second cast.
Nice, that's awesome, dude. Not bad, just a few miles outside of New York City, huh?
Not bad at all, Cap, thank you.
All right, I got you. Beautiful fish, huh?
Nice.
Very strong, all muscle. All right, there's not really much of a commercial market for them because they're very red, but Carrie can make anything taste good, so.
What's amazing to me is that we have such an incredible resource of fish, and you think, wow, New York City, all this pollutant and effluent, etc.
I have to field that question a lot. Everybody says, oh, you could eat those fish? Well, yeah, of course you could eat them. I mean, they're migratory fish. All this water will be gone, and you'll have a new batch of water coming in 12 hours. All that ocean water comes in here, so it's not really New York Harbor or Hudson River water, it's ocean water.
Right.
Things have cleaned up here tremendously in the last 20 years.
Oh, 100%. We're growing oysters for research purposes off of our boat, and they are so healthy.
No kidding.
It is just unbelievable.
Wow, that's cool.
So here's a fish that is in great abundance. I think John mentioned yesterday that it was 200% over the allowable biomass to catch. So it's plentiful, it's delicious, and underappreciated. We have a ceviche of porgy, also known as Montauk sea bream, with sweet and spicy peppers, kaffir lime, and avocado. And notice there's a firmness, yet it yields to the bite. It's not too tough. I think that's important, the texture. And then there's a sweetness that comes from this diet of, little crabs and shrimps and small things that the porgies love to eat.
All right, so that was my quick introduction. Am I still on?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yep, you're still there.
Sorry, okay. Hope that was helpful, and I look forward to seeing more about what questions you have to see how we tackled resilience in these challenging times.
Great, thank you very much, Chef. Next up is Peter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Stein. I'm the founder of Pico Oysters. I started the business back in 2016 and brought my first oysters to market. Given the growth rate of oysters, I brought my first oysters to market in the fall of 2017. And as a result of that, started to just really bring oysters directly to chefs. Big fan of like what Carrie Heffernan is doing at Grand Banks and in previous positions, especially with species such as porgies. I grew up fishing on the in the Peconic Estuary and very much enjoying a day's catch for dinner. And that day's catch was often porgies or blackfish or bluefish, species that you don't usually see on menus in restaurants. And I think that those fish are extremely delicious and very sustainable stock levels of in terms of the fish out there. And that kind of conceptually was what drew me to oysters as well, was the environmental benefit. I mean, I am not a multi-generational oyster farmer. I was in educational software, selling enterprise level software to school districts before starting an oyster farm. And what drew me to the oyster farm, and more broadly speaking, the mariculture industry, was an opportunity to grow a really good product, meaning a delicious product, and do some good for the environment at the same time. And I think that goes beyond, the well-known facts of what people often gravitate towards with oyster farming, and some of the kind of what I would almost call byproducts. I know byproducts is often a word that is has a negative connotation to it, but in this way, I use it in a very positive way, in that the cages that we use to grow oysters actually provide habitat and sanctuary for juvenile finfish. So we often find lots and lots of different types of finfish gathering around the cages that we have out in the bay. Anyway, so big fan of what chefs like Carrie are doing with lesser utilized species out there. I will just also mention, I know the Gulf of Maine Research Institute is a very big proponent of different species, such as dogfish, or what some people call sand sharks. I mean, I even love eating sea robin. I know I'm an oyster farmer, so maybe I'll stick to shellfish as well. Yeah, so started Pico Oysters in 2016, brought my first oyster to market in 2017, was selling pretty much oysters just directly to chefs and restaurants, maintaining that direct to chef connection. And that all changed about a year ago when COVID hit and every restaurant in New York City and I mean, largely across the country was shut down for certainly a period of time over the last 12 months. And I'll stop there because I think part of that story has to do with some of the questions that are going to be asked on the panel. And those are some of my responses to those questions. So back to you.
All right, great. Yeah, we don't want to steal our own thunder before the storm ensues, huh? All right, next up is going to be David.
Thank you very much. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll bring up. Okay, is everybody able to see that okay?
Looks good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me at the Seafood Summit. This is my first time being here, and it's a pleasure to be here and to meet with all of you. I have a PowerPoint presentation to give everyone an overview of what we do at the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. First, a little bit about myself. My name is David Lupardo. I'm the Chief Inspector at the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. I've been with this agency for 23 years. I've been Chief Inspector for 2.5 years, and I work out of the Brooklyn Regional Office, beautiful downtown Brooklyn. The area in which I cover and supervise is all of Long Island, the Bronx, Queens, and Upper Manhattan. I have 5 supervisors and 28 inspectors. Our 28 inspectors cover all of these areas. A little bit about jurisdiction. I think one of the most common questions I get asked from new businesses opening up is, whose jurisdiction do I fall under? Am I under you guys at Ag and Markets, or am I under the local health department? So I'd like to briefly give you an overview of jurisdiction. I'd also like to tell you that we have approximately 11,000 establishments which we inspect in my region, Region 2. And the most common type of establishment that is under our jurisdiction is your typical retail food store, the bodega. We also have retail fish stores, wholesale food manufacturing plants, warehouses, whether it's cold or frozen storage, and sushi manufacturing at wholesale and packaged at retail. We also inspect supermarkets and the supermarkets such as your Costco's and BJ's. We do the wineries, breweries, and the live poultry markets. That's what we do at Ag and Markets. And at your local health department, their jurisdiction is pretty much everything else, mainly the restaurants, taverns, nightclubs, concession stands, cafeterias, carnivals, the fairs, and of course, they do the hospitals and nursing home services as well. So what kind of inspections do we do at Ag and Markets? Well, the most common type of inspection is a general food safety inspection at a retail food store. But we also do Haskell inspections, whether seafood Haskell or juice Haskell. Those are some of the types of inspections we do, including low acid canned food inspections and acidified food inspections as well. We also began conducting preventive control inspections, also known as the PC inspection. Some of the seafood processing that we see in New York State includes vacuum packaging, smoking, brining, curing, filleting, shucking, packing, storing, freezing, and sushi manufacturing at wholesale or again packaged at retail. So what kind of food business licensing do you need to be under the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets? There are mainly 3 establishment licenses that we have. The first and most common is the 20C food processing license. That's for establishments that do cooking, broiling, frying, grilling, freezing, drying, roasting, all types of food processing operations. If you're not doing food processing, but you do have a retail food store and you do sell potentially hazardous foods such as milk, eggs, refrigerated meats, well, the Article 28A retail food store license is for you. If you have a warehouse in New York State where you're housing and selling commercial food products, but it doesn't include raw agricultural product. Anything else other than raw agricultural product, the Warehouse 28D license is for you. Again, I'd like to just say also that if you'd like to follow more about food business licensing or any of the topics I'm talking about today, it'd be important to visit the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets website for detailed information on anything I'm discussing. One thing that I'd like to mention to everyone is our mantra. here at the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. Yes, we're a regulatory agency. Yes, we have to do inspections to ensure the safety of the food that's getting out to the public. But I definitely like to let everybody know that all our inspectors educate as we do our inspections. We like to discuss and review our inspection reports with the establishment operators, owners, and managers. We want to teach them as at the same time as we regulate. We want to discuss our findings with the firm operators. We want them to understand why these issues that we find during our inspections need to be corrected, how they relate to food safety, public safety. We simply want to bring establishments into compliance. And I feel we do that together. We're here to help. It's a teamwork approach. And I have establishment operators call me all the time discussing their inspection reports. We review it together. We correct the deficiencies. We discuss why. They have their follow-up inspections, and things go well. So it's important for us to all get the message across that we educate as we regulate. So during COVID, we developed guidance documents and resources. I'm going to discuss two of them today. They were developed to assist the seafood industry during this unprecedented time. Again, I'm going to say, please review all of our guidance documents on the Department of Agriculture and Markets website. So two for today, the interim guidance for temporary seafood, fish, and shellfish processing and or retail, and the interim guidance for restaurants and food manufacturers, distributors to sell grocery items. I'll briefly go over both of these guidance documents. First, the interim guidance documents for temporary seafood, fish, and shellfish processing and or retail sale. This guidance document was created to assist fishing operations who normally sell their product through wholesale channels, whether it be through restaurants or food service operations. Well, now we're giving them the opportunity to sell their seafood products directly to the end user, to the customer. The guidance document goes on to describe what the requirements are for these processing operations and these facilities. Some of the guidance reviews the facilities itself. It discusses the cleanliness and sanitary conditions of the operations. It talks about packaging and repackaging some of these items. It also discusses the water supply, drainage, the bathroom facilities, the waste storage, prevention of cross-contamination. It talks about temperatures, the important temperatures for holding products, storage, display, cooking temperatures. All of this is described in the interim guidance document. It also talks about, of course, monitoring your critical control points. Records must be adhered to, labeling, proper labeling of your products, repackaging, transportation of fish and shellfish, of course, monitoring temperatures, and of course, discussion of labeling of food allergens. Just briefly here, I described some of the 5 basic labeling requirements, but for a detailed discussion of proper food labeling, please visit our website. The next guidance document I'd like to discuss is the interim guidance for restaurants and food manufacturers, distributors to sell grocery items. This interim guidance document was created to assist restaurants, food manufacturers, and other food service operators that hold a license to now sell foods that we consider grocery items during this COVID-19 restrictions. Those looking to take advantage of this guidance document, again, I refer you to our website for a brief overview. Again, there's a discussion of what are the requirements for these facilities to sell grocery items. Well, there's a discussion of facilities themselves, sanitation and processing. Talks about temperatures, the storage temperature of food items, refrigeration, hot holding, of course, packaging, repackaging, and labeling, and allergen labeling as well. Most importantly is my contact information. please feel free if you want to take advantage of any of these guidance documents or have questions about jurisdiction, licensing, or if you have a business opportunity that you'd like to discuss with me and get an idea of what you need to do to come into the New York State Department of Agriculture markets and obtain a license with me, here's my phone number, my email address, and always feel free to contact me. We are here to help. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, David. I always appreciate it when the regulatory agencies make it very clear that their intention is to help and educate and bring people into compliance as a team. David, we did have a little chat discussion about your sound. While we're getting ready for the Q&A, you might want to check and see if you have another microphone you might be able to take advantage of. You weren't cutting out completely, but your volume was dropping, and I think some people may have had a little trouble hearing. So you have a couple minutes here.
Okay.
The last person that I'd like to introduce on our panel is going to be Paul. Paul, you there? There you are. I see you. All right, Paul. It's all yours.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in the summit. This too is my very first foray into the fishing industry and this program. I am the CEO of Long Island Cares and the Harry Chapin Regional Food Bank, which is based in Hauppauge, New York, right here on Long Island. We have, as you could imagine, been involved in responding to COVID-19 since the middle of March. And what we've seen, just to give you a sense of the landscape here in Nassau and Suffolk County when it comes to food insecurity as a direct result of the pandemic, we have witnessed a 63% increase in the number of people turning to the food bank, the local community food pantries, and other emergency food providers. In the past 11 months, we have assisted an additional 220,000 Long Islanders who find themselves struggling with food insecurity, primarily as a result of losing their employment, either by being furloughed or being laid off, or their businesses closing. A good number of those people have been restaurant workers, people working in the hospitality industry. We do have 350 of our community food pantries who have remained open during the last 11 months. Part of our response to COVID-19 was to work with local government. So in addition to the 350 pantries we provide food to, we also opened up 18 temporary pop-up distribution centers in high-need at-risk communities here on the island. As of today, that number's down to 4. Long Island Cares also operates 6 of our own satellite locations. Each of them has an emergency food pantry, and we continue to do that today. Overall, in terms of our food purchasing, because we purchase about 65 to 70% of all the food that we distribute. The rest of the food comes from retail donations, from food drives, through Feeding America. But for the most part, the majority of the food that we distribute to feed the hungry here in the region is purchased. And we have increased our purchasing in the last 11 months. We've purchased 72% additional food to bring into the region to help people in need. And we have distributed an additional 68% of food. Sometime, I believe in May, I remember it well, it was 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. All 10 food banks in New York State had a conference call with Commissioner Ball from the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets to roll out Governor Cuomo's Nourish New York initiative. Those of you familiar with the initiative, the governor was going to move $25 million within the state budget to the food banks with the requirement that the money be spent here in New York State to support the farming industry, the dairy industry, and also meats and proteins. The total contribution from New York State was $25 million, of which Long Island Cares received a little over 700,000, with about 640,000 being earmarked for food purchases. And that was followed up a few months back with a second round of Nourish New York, which equaled 10 million. And most recently, a third round of Nourish New York for another $25 million. Of the total 25 million, Long Island Cares received about 1.6 million of it. In May, as we were in the height of our response to COVID, and certainly excited about the phone call with Ag and Markets and the Health Department and the Governor's Office, everybody wanting to do the same, to do the good work, the right work. We started hearing reports and reading articles in Newsday about the restaurant closures, about the fishing industry, the difficulty many of our fishermen were having here on Long Island. And immediately what came to mind was how much of this $1.6 million can we keep on Long Island? And I remember during our conference call asking if we were able to direct the money primarily to Long Island farmers, Long Island fishermen, et cetera. And we were told, yes, we could do that. That would be great. We recognized the fishing industry on Long Island, had a really terrific phone call with Linda Laviolette. And so we proceeded to move forward and reached out to Captain Haskell, who we've been purchasing fish from. The interesting thing is what happened with the fish, before I tell you what we actually accomplished. As we're reading the articles, I kept seeing the face of one of our more prominent donors, that donor being Billy Joel. And so we reached out to him and we said, how would you like to partner with us on this initiative we're thinking about? And I remember his staff saying, what is it and how much? And we basically said, we want to ramp up fish purchasing. We want to make sure we're taking care of the East End fishermen. And we're going to need a portable trailer to be parked outside our East End distribution center in Hampton Bays. I think it took him 10 seconds to say, fine, whatever it is, send me the bill. And so Billy Joel leased the trailer for us. So since May of 2020, through the generosity of the Nourish New York program, we have spent more than $564,000 of Nourish New York funding, purchasing fish caught here on Long Island, just to help out our fishermen. It equates to roughly 82 to 85,000 pounds that we've purchased, and we continue to purchase it. I'm not that knowledgeable about fish, only the fish that I eat, but things like dogfish and things like tilefish started showing up on the menu, individually packed and frozen. And I can't tell you how pleased our pantries were to get this product. It's been a win-win for us, the fishermen, the industry here on Long Island. We were happy to do our part, and also, encourage the rest of our colleagues in the food banks that when you're purchasing, please think about Long Island. Please think about our fishing community and help them out as best as we can. Unfortunately, in May of last year, that's really not the growing season here on Long Island. So we actually put some money aside so we could take care of the Long Island farmers when their growing season was up and running. So we've been able to do that as well. So the important thing for us was that not only were we able to feed people who were food insecure, but in many ways we were able to throw a lifeline to an industry that really needed it at a critical time. And we were thrilled to do it and very proud of the relationship we have with the fishing community right now. So thank you very much for including us. It's been a great ride and we look forward to more opportunities.
Great, Paul. Thank you very much. All right. We have a couple of questions that we prepared for the panel. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the question to the chat so that everyone can see it and the panelists can take a look at it also. And we're going to start with Carrie. How were you and your business affected by the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic?
So, am I on? Okay. So we we had a rough start because there was a lot of questions. No one knew quite what was going to happen. We were not sure. Their restaurants were pretty much closed. As it happens, all of our restaurants are outdoor, so we're at a bit of an advantage there when it comes to some of the COVID regulations. We still had to comply with a much smaller occupancy, especially as it pertains to the bar and our private dining. But on the other hand, we were again able to take advantage of a lot of the outdoor space that we have, and even work with our partners in both Hudson River and Brooklyn Bridge Parks to expand a little bit into some outdoor seating. We sort of toyed with the to-go model to begin with, just to see how that would work. And there was good interest to begin with, because I think people had been cooped up for a while at that point. What we started noticing is that we were reaching out to our purveyors, and we saw, how horribly many of them were impacted. I think Pete can probably speak much more clearly to what happens in the aquaculture world when you've, set up a date to harvest oysters, and all of a sudden there's very few customers. We know that some of our friends in the markets, in Hunts Point, et cetera, had a real hard time. I think they were particularly hard hit with some cases and even some fatalities. So I know that was a big blow to a lot of our partners who work out of the market. But as sort of May moved along into June, we saw a sort of a surge of interest in dining outdoors. So we adapted, and we were lucky enough to be able to make the most of that demand, and sort of ended the year at about 60% of our sales. So it was part of our flexibility in doing some to-go to begin with, and then it was really more of an opportunity that, again, where we're situated in an outdoor maritime environment. Our restaurants are all on the water, and I think all that constant 10 to 12 knot southwesterly wind that we're lucky enough to have really makes a difference in how people feel, as opposed to going into some of these sort of semi-enclosed spaces that you see now. So we're looking forward to hopefully another season. We don't know exactly what to expect in terms of the regulations. It's 25% indoor now. I think it's going to 35% soon. So that may give us a little more wiggle room and be able to accommodate a few more guests. But we had to do some rigorous testing of staff and things like that. That was a new piece. Standards in how we prepared food, in tight quarters. So there was a lot of impacts that we were able to eventually implement and sort of get through. I guess the question that everybody's wondering is how is it going to affect the future? I think that long term, indoor dining is still going to be something of a question mark for people, and how comfortable they are in terms of returning in the numbers to these restaurants, and that's kind of the big thing for us.
That's great. Thank you, Chef. Next, we have Peter.
Yeah. So how was my business affected by COVID? I mean, so I run an oyster farm, and in many ways we are a one-trick pony. We have one product, and we have really, at the time of COVID, only one customer, really, in the sense that we were dealing directly with restaurants. And because of that, when restaurants shut down in mid-March of last year, our revenue stream went to zero. And I mean, over 95% of our product was going to restaurants. So obviously it was very scary for me as a business owner. I mean, not only do I have a business that I've poured my heart and soul into, but I also have employees who, their livelihoods revolve around us selling oysters to restaurants. But that was all quite a bit scary. One thing that I'll just kind of note in terms of us being shut down essentially by effectively having no customers. The difference is that I run a farm where I have millions of living organisms out in the bay that need to be attended to. Whereas, and I'm not belittling any of the difficulties that Kerry or any of the other chefs and restaurateurs went through in March of last year and have continued to go through throughout the year. But in a restaurant or other businesses, you can kind of shut your doors and mitigate against or your losses. Whereas like if I just abandon the field of oysters that I have out in the bay, it's not going to be there for me when business comes back to life. So I have to keep my business going. I can't just kind of sell my perishable products, shut the door, and say, okay, well, how am I going to deal with paying my rent and other overhead expenses? I have a business that I must keep going. So anyway, that's my business was dried up, and I had to figure out ways to recover at least some of my revenue. And I think that we have some additional questions that will go into that. But that's really how my business was affected by COVID. And I'll pause there and think and provide some responses in terms of our response to COVID after the other panelists are able to provide input.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Next up, we got David.
Food businesses and their employees are all essential. And as an agency, we continue to ensure the food supply chain remains open. Our food inspectors continue to conduct food safety inspections throughout this pandemic. In addition to their regular duties as food inspectors, they also provide information and guidance on measures food establishments must take to ensure compliance with New York State public health regulations related to COVID. They are also conducting COVID-related investigations when we receive allegations of firms not complying with New York State public health regulations. All of this is taking place while ensuring the health and safety of our inspectors.
Great, thank you, David. Yeah, I mean, I guess that kind of highlights the difference, right, between the regulatory agencies and some of the businesses. All right, last but certainly not least, and if we have enough questions, he will be first at one point. We have Paul.
Well, in terms of the pandemic affecting our business, that sort of seems to be, in my opinion, the bright spot for food banks across the country. At least up until about a month ago, you couldn't turn on the television without seeing the food lines or the car lines of people who are food insecure throughout the country. And so the public really has a new understanding and a new appreciation for what food banks do. And one of the ways that played itself out, not just for Long Island Cares, but completely throughout the country and the Feeding America network, is the amount of money that all of us have been able to raise, both private donations, corporate donations, federal funding, state funding. You know, in early March of 2020, Long Island Care's annual budget was projected to be $15 million. Our 2021 budget is projected at $36 million. So it gives you a sense as to how much money we've raised. Right before March, February of last year, there were 53 people working in Long Island Cares. In November, it was 78 people. And today it is 64 permanent staff members. So what we really looked at and benefited from was about a 350% increase in our fundraising dollars, which will completely sustain us for the next year, year and a half. One of the things that the fundraising has allowed us to do is to take a look at the region. One of the nice things that have happened as a result of COVID is a number of grassroots organizations coming into existence, trying to help out their local neighbors in need. And we've made it a priority that those organizations, those grassroots organizations that are making an effort to feed the poor or feed people who are food insecure or really look at high need communities, we want to meet with them and provide them with some grant funding and support that they can keep going as long as they're needed. And we've already, provided grants to organizations such as school-based food pantries, pet rescue organizations, and even a catering company comprised of about a half a dozen restaurant owners who got together at a commercial kitchen and are preparing meals for homebound seniors and veterans. And so we wanted to support them as well. So all in all, we've grown. I think we've grown smart and we've been able to sustain what we're doing. And that to me is a very important thing, because until everybody's vaccinated or, we get into the herd immunity and people can go about their business as it was, a year ago, we still have to be there for the communities in need.
Great, thank you, Paul. It just kind of dawned on me the dynamics of our panelists, in response to crisis. The way that different organizations are feeling the effects of this pandemic. It wasn't clear to me until I heard it all. So thank you very much. All right, we're going to go on to the next question. I'm going to start with Peter this time. So what are some things that you did or continue to do to adapt to the drastic economic and market changes that occurred in 2020? And what are some things that did not work?
Yeah, so it's been a very long year. I feel like we're all living in dog years right now. So I'm just kind of thinking back on this. I mean, I have prepared some comments and thoughts about in response to the question, but kind of doing also a little bit of thinking on the fly. I think one of the things that was very I'd say a silver lining or one of the positives coming out of coronavirus, which has been mentioned certainly by Paul as well as the other panelists, is that there's an enormous amount of generosity coming out of the general public, an enormous amount of support for local businesses and small businesses, and I think that this pandemic has highlighted how important small business is for the country and our local communities. So, looking back on that is kind of the advantage of hindsight. But at the moment, kind of living through it in March and April and May of last year, I was able to kind of leverage some of that social goodwill, so to speak, in order to access a body of consumers for oysters that I didn't know really existed before that. So some of the things that I did was I really shifted my business to a direct-to-consumer business. And because restaurants were not available, as Carrie mentioned, the markets in Hunts Point and equivalents in other cities around the country were largely shut down. And 90% of oysters are consumed in restaurants. So I was actually pretty surprised and shocked to see that people were, because restaurants weren't available, because there was all this enthusiasm for small business and, let's cheer on the Davids against the Goliaths. I had a lot of customers kind of coming out of the woodwork. So I had to figure out ways in which to get the product to them. I was doing a lot of home deliveries, which is something that I have stopped doing because it was just not something that was sustainable economically speaking. I mean, again, I'm a one-trick pony, and nobody's ordering 200 oysters to their homes, which would make it, I mean, like Baldor started doing home deliveries as well, but they could set a minimum of like $250 for delivery because you could order chicken and fish and beef and vegetables and all sorts of different things. You basically are going grocery shopping, and you can hit that $250 minimum pretty easily. Hitting a $250 minimum when all you're buying is oysters, you gotta really like oysters a lot. So I was doing the home deliveries because like I needed to, and I had to generate revenue back in March and April and May. But I'm not doing that any longer. I'm doing a lot more shipping of oysters around the country these days. So yeah, I mean, I think accessing kind of the general public. Another thing that I will also mention that I started to do, and then I'll pass the microphone along, is I needed to educate my consumer. And I needed to utilize tools that were easily accessible and basically freely accessible to me. So, for example, I started to create YouTube videos about, well, if you've never had an oyster in your home refrigerator, I mean, I was making home deliveries at 10 a.m. in the morning, and people were like, "Oh, if I don't eat this oyster for lunch, is it going to still be good at dinner time?" And so there's a lot of lack of knowledge around how to store these products in your home refrigerator. And how to shuck an oyster, and well, if I'm scared of shucking and I don't want to stab myself, like, are there other options? Are there other ways in which I can eat an oyster? So I utilized a lot of like available tools like YouTube, Google Forms. I've since matured quite a bit in terms of the sophistication of the tools that I've used, but that's taken me over a year in order to get there. So anyway, I'll stop there and allow some of my colleagues to speak.
Peter, so a lot of us are, very interested in seafood and quite knowledgeable, but this is also a learning opportunity for anybody in the audience. Can you answer the question that you posed? If your oysters are delivered at 10 a.m. and you don't eat them for lunch, is there going to be a problem?
You absolutely can. Number one, I suggest you take a look at the YouTube video that I created to answer that exact question. But number two, what's actually really cool about oysters is that relative to many other seafood products, they actually have a very good shelf life. So if you store them properly, I regularly eat oysters that are a week, 10 days, 2 weeks out of the water. And as long as they're stored properly, those oysters are quite fresh, delicious, and have very little degradation of quality or taste, even though they've been out of the water for that long.
All right, great. Thank you, Peter. So now we're moving on. David.
The New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets added a page to its website called What You Need to Know. This page contains the latest information related to assisting food establishment operators continue to operate during this pandemic. Documents include COVID-19 guidance and resources for the ag community, and multiple guidance documents, including interim guidance for temporary seafood processing and/or retail sale. Our agency also implemented the Nourish New York program. Nourish New York reroutes surplus agricultural products to populations who need them most through New York's network of food banks. We also reached out to the facilities we license to obtain their email address and use those email addresses to create a listserv as a way to actively communicate with these businesses. Information was coming out quickly, and we needed a mechanism to quickly communicate with those changes to ensure the essential businesses we serve stay open and operating.
David, were there any challenges or was there anything that you guys tried that you had to pivot from, maybe from earlier in the pandemic?
I would say there was a learning curve involved because this was coming at us very quickly. And we needed to hear the communities who we serve and to come up with ideas relatively quickly. You can just imagine the amount of work it would take to come up with email addresses for every establishment in the state of New York to ensure we can get information out to them quickly. It was a daunting task. It was requiring the efforts of all our inspectors and supervisors throughout the state. But we actually did it, and I'm certainly proud of it. And we're continue to learn. We are learning as we go along, and we're trying to provide a service as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you, David. Not last this time, Paul.
Thank you. I think in terms of early on in the challenges that we started to see in March, April, and May, we really, came up with a three-pronged plan that we had to invest time and energy in. One was the well-being of our staff, because this was an issue that was going to be impacting everyone. Wasn't like Hurricane Sandy, where it was just 14,000 people on the South Shore. This was going to impact 2.8 million people on Long Island. We also had to seriously take a look at our funding capabilities and funding opportunities, and then prepare to do extensive outreach to various communities. And that's why we hired the additional staff. In terms of, what we were focusing on, in terms of big challenges, certainly staff morale and staff's own mental health. The fact that we started to see people here working at Long Island Cares who were testing positive for COVID. We had, 2-3 people out at the same time who were quarantining at home, and people just getting generally anxious about what was going on. But in terms of how we dealt with those challenges, we found two things that were very successful for us. As soon as we transitioned into crisis mode, I knew this was going to impact people. I mean, I am a licensed social worker, so I knew what my staff was going through. We immediately reduced the work week by 5 hours in order to give staff an opportunity to spend more time with their families. Right now, we're moving forward with people being able to leave an hour and a half earlier on Fridays, and staff seem to be, they've adapted to it and they really enjoy it. And last but not least, we provided our staff with bonuses twice during the past 11 months to, let them know how much we appreciated all the time and effort they've been putting in to responding to the pandemic, all the traveling that they're doing, and putting themselves at risk for further exposure. So that helped us weather some difficult times. But like today, as I said, things are getting back to normal. I hope that by the end of the summer, things will lighten up for us. But that's the way we got through.
Great, thank you. Kerry, I know you mentioned some of these things in your intro, but do you have anything you'd like to add to specifically some things you did to adapt or are currently doing, or maybe some things that you tried but didn't work?
Well, I'll talk to you almost a little bit to Peter's point, and I noticed that some of our vendors who went to the direct-to-consumer route, which sounded like a great idea, and it probably started out well, but eventually that ended up tailing off. Our lobster purveyor, for example, ended up, eventually having enough, customers for him to service restaurants again. I think that it really comes down to seeing how people want to treat restaurants in this era. I think certain places you go to for certain things, and while our product is I believe wonderful, we're also somewhat experiential. So people would want to come to us to get away. What we did notice is that people's resilience to the weather changed dramatically. In previous years, somewhere around September, we would use 60 degrees as the tipping point at which people would just say, you know, I'm done, I'm going indoors. Well, now that's probably 25 degrees. I think people say that they're willing to sort of put up with. So we expect to see guests earlier and later, just because they've come up with all sorts of, I see people passing around these websites for heated vests so you can really dine outside comfortably, and all sorts of other adaptations. I want to speak to Paulie's point that we also noticed and were concerned about our staff, and we do, at least I do personally, a great deal of work with New York's food insecure through something called City Harvest. And we saw, you know, a massive increase in the demand for that. And so, you know, it's a difficult position for us as a restaurant to be able to help and contribute when our revenues and personnel have dropped off so much. But we found some great ways to sort of co-opt resources and come up with ways to help them as their demand, you know, for food for New York's food insecure increased. And that was, you know, sort of gratifying. You know, one of the things that we can do to help those organizations is obviously to raise money. And one of the ways you raise money is through, you know, these sort of large scale walk around charity events, or being able to auction off our talents to come into your home and, you know, cook for 10 guests, and hopefully some rich, you know, donor would pay $25,000 for that, which would, you know, benefit organizations like Paulie's. That changed a lot. What we ended up doing was virtual events like that, which didn't get quite as much money, but at least it was a way to keep engaged with that community and continue to help, you know, those who really needed it, as well as keep the folks who were interested in that sort of engaged. You know, that the chance that people want to help and they need a place to do it. You know, it's good to keep those sort of networks active. You know, the other thing that I got a little concerned about is, and I think Peter brought this up, is the notion of maintaining sustainability, you know, kind of at the forefront, because people started sourcing food differently and finding, you know, there's probably, if you shop, you know, online, there's probably lots of cheaper, easier ways to buy seafood than to buy sustainable, you know, New York seafood. So, you know, I would do everything I could on a social media standpoint and through whatever channels, you know, available to us, to continue to focus on saying, let's not forget that there are challenged ecosystems here, and there are people who are also, you know, trying to make a living. And, you know, if we can partner with them to make sure that I promote recipes or, you know, portals for them to access that food at the same time.
Great, thank you, Chef. All right, one last question for the panel. We are running into our last 10 minutes. I think we really only have about 5 for the panel, but I think we might be able to get Mike to give us a couple more so we can get through these. This is the question that I'm personally the most interested in. We'll be starting with David on this one. I'm gonna go ahead and post it. So in your opinion, what could be done to make seafood businesses or the New York seafood industry more resilient to crisis, such as this 2020 pandemic or something else that may be equally disruptive in the future?
I would say continue to check the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets website for further updates to our guidance documents, and continue to look at the most up-to-date versions of the regulatory guides developed by our colleagues at the New York Sea Grant. And of course, as always, feel free to contact our department with any questions you have. After all, we are here to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Paul.
I don't really know if I could adequately answer a question about the seafood industry and how to keep them viable and sustainable. I will say this. I thought it was interesting in our early conversations about Nourish New York that we weren't focusing in a great deal on the fishing industry. It was mostly upstate farmers, dairy farmers. And I was glad I was able to bring up the issue to Commissioner Ball, and even more happier when Linda and the commissioner's staff embraced the idea of, yes, reach out to the fishermen, do whatever you can. So in the end, it was just the best move we made.
Well, Paul, you're part of the New York Seafood Summit family now, so feel free to reach out to any of us at any time if you want to learn more about what's going on. That's one of the ideals of the New York Seafood Summit, is to connect as many people in New York that touch the seafood industry as possible. And it's always a pleasure to bring in people that may not have known as much about it beforehand. So I think this is instructive for a lot of people. I hope you learned as much as you've taught.
Great deal.
Now, Kerry.
So what I think is we sort of learned and saw is what we can do is a lot of the same thing. In other words, one of the things that restaurants can do, and chefs in particular, is to create engagement and leadership. And when people are frightened and scared about a certain issue or don't know, again, we're lucky enough to have a pretty good social media presence. So we can use that to broadcast what we're doing, what we think are, the best practices, whether they be, for dining or for choices in seafood, et cetera. And also to make sure that we are always trying to do the best we can to take care of the community, because that's what it comes down to is, you can build a restaurant in any number of ways, but the people who populate it and the way they use it, they are your community. And the stronger and more cohesive that family is, the better it is for you and all the stakeholders that you rely on and rely on you.
Great, thank you. I think that's been a theme this entire week, is the way that the community responds. And I think that's going to be very important going forward also. So thank you for that. All right, last, but as I said, certainly not least, Peter.
Yeah, so I think that there are kind of two approaches to answering the question. One is like, what can we as individual businesses do to be more resilient to crisis? And then what can organizations such as Sea Grant or regulatory bodies do to help businesses be more resilient to crisis? So, I've mentioned in almost every time I've had a chance to speak here is the idea that we are an oyster farm and a one-trick pony. So, and Kerry mentioned earlier on, his enthusiasm for kelp. So diversification of species is, I think, something that is being highlighted for us at Pico Oysters and other my contemporaries in the industry as well. I know that there's enormous enthusiasm for kelp among oyster farmers out there. Revenue diversification as well. I mean, that goes hand in hand with crop diversification, but accessing customers that you didn't previously have. And I think that ag and markets plays a big role here. As a small business owner, our hands are full of all these different kind of things and challenges that we have to contend with from a business perspective as well as regulatory perspectives. And just having clear information that we can access easily of what is when we have a business idea, what is the regulatory body that we have to go to? So I don't know, I mean, I'm just thinking off the cuff here, but like almost having like a 311 of government, so that like we can navigate the regulatory bodies that we're responsible to or for as small businesses would be like a huge advantage because when I have business ideas, I am often lost in a cloud of like, I don't know whether I'm supposed to be talking to the DEC, Ag and Markets, Department of Health, USDA, the Coast Guard. I mean, we all know that there are a zillion governmental agencies out there that we have to contend with and be responsible to. I think we're all trying to do this through our own microphones and standing on our own soapboxes. but really just educating consumers. And I think, you know, there's a trend towards eating locally, eating sustainably. And I would say, you know, to the extent that you have your own microphone and your own ability to evangelize for local food systems and, you know, pass information along, you know, I think that's a great thing to be doing among your friends, your family. If you have a social media following, whatever it is, just kind of advocating for local food systems. And I think that, you know, at the end of the day, I do grow a commodity, but I think that there are ways in which I am trying to decommoditize the product. And that has to do with stories. That has to do with, you know, the people behind these products. And I think we all have unique stories to tell. And you know, our collective microphone is much louder than our individual ones. So being able to do that is a great way to help advocate for us.
Great, Peter. Thank you. How true that is. I want to thank all the panelists for your thoughtful responses. I know I learned quite a bit from this time with you all, and I'm glad to count you among friends of the summit. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks again, Carrie, Peter, David, and Paul for sharing with us today. I also want to thank everyone who participated in today's event. And before we end the day, we do ask that you take a few moments to complete the event evaluation, which will be linked in the chat box now. I'll also take a moment to share and introduce you to some of the new resources and efforts that New York Sea Grant has going on. So we do have, and this touches on what you're talking about, Peter, in terms of guidance. We are developing some guidance documents, specifically regulatory guides, as well as topical resources to complement those that specifically outline the process of getting product to market, what regulations come into play if you're looking to sell to different avenues. So those are going to be launched and available later this year. We're shooting for an April launch. We're hosting a webinar to introduce those and what they are and how they work to the industry and to the New York producers out there. In addition, we're also starting these efforts to work towards the development of regulatory guides for seaweed processing and production in New York as well. We also have a consumer preference survey that's going to be going out and underway shortly that's going to help us to identify the preferred and preference for seafood in the New York market to help those producing seafood to understand what the general consumers here are looking for. So those are going to be conducted and available later this year as well to help guide you in future endeavors and efforts for processing and marketing different products in New York. Lastly, the Great Lakes Fish Finder, Emma, our new aquaculture specialist, is working to have that launched this year in the next month or so, I think next month. If you are a producer looking to get your product to market and share that more broadly, do reach out to Emma to inquire and ask to get more information on that effort. So again, thank you everybody for participating today. Please take a moment to complete that evaluation. And we hope to see you all next year at our 2022 Seafood Summit.